The stories you are about to hear are works of fiction. While they may reference real names, places, or events, any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental and unintended. Real-world locations may be reimagined, their histories reshaped for narrative effect. Any names, characters, businesses, or organizations mentioned, whether real or imagined, are used fictitiously. These tales are not bound by fact, but by fear, folklore, and the ghostly echoes of imagination. No harm, misrepresentation, or defamation is intended toward any individual, place, or community. Whispers of the Ancient City. Ghost Stories of St. Augustine. Chapter 1. The Keeper of the Watchtower. St. Augustine, with its cobbled streets, moss-draped oaks, and flickering lantern-lit alleyways, has always felt like a city that exists between worlds. Caught between the past and present, the living and the dead. Its centuries-old buildings stand as silent witnesses to wars, pirates, plagues, and restless spirits who never moved on. This story begins at the St. Augustine Lighthouse. It was a bitter winter evening. Not cold by northern standards, but the coastal chill carried a ghostly dampness, as if the sea had exhaled something ancient across the town. Tourists had mostly gone, and the lighthouse grounds had emptied. But inside the tower, Daniel Briggs, a local historian, had stayed behind. Daniel wasn't supposed to be there that night. He'd volunteered for the Lighthouse Museum's paranormal night tours, but this was different. He wasn't guiding anyone. He was there alone, reviewing old blueprints and files in the tower keeper's office, researching claims of odd architectural changes over the decades. That's when he heard the first whisper. "You shouldn't be here." Daniel froze. The sound wasn't electronic, it hadn't come through the small digital recorder he'd placed on the desk. It came from behind him, faint, like the breeze had formed words as it passed through the stairwell. He turned toward the base of the spiral staircase, shining his flashlight into the stone shaft. Nothing. He called out, half expecting a prank. "Hello. Tour's over. You missed the ghost walk." Silence. He returned to his seat, but the moment he did, his flashlight dimmed and blinked out. Then came footsteps. Not heavy boots, but soft, slow steps, like bare feet on aged wood. They echoed from above. It wasn't the first time people had heard footsteps in the lighthouse. The ghost of a lighthouse keeper, believed to be Joseph Andrew, who fell to his death while painting the exterior in 1859, was said to wander the tower during stormy nights or when repairs were underway. But tonight wasn't stormy. Daniel, heart racing, stood and stared up the coiled stairs. One by one, the iron steps climbed into darkness like the spine of some ancient beast. He had a decision to make. Flee or investigate. He chose the latter. That was his mistake. With each step, he whispered reassurances to himself. "It's just the wind. Or maybe an old squirrel nest. The wind. Definitely." By the time he reached the landing just below the lantern room, he could smell it. Not rust or sea salt. Something older. Burnt oil. Smoke. Maybe lamp oil. He paused. That room hadn't used oil in over a century. The final door was open slightly. Just enough to creak. He pushed it. Inside the lantern room, the city lights shimmered on the horizon, distorted by the old glass panes. The beacon no longer turned. Its glow retired to modern automation. But tonight, it pulsed faintly. Daniel stepped inside. Then, movement. A figure. Dressed in a sooty gray coat. Hat pulled low. Back turned. "Hey." Daniel called out. "You're trespassing." The figure didn't turn. Instead, it pointed toward the flame-shaped light fixture. The glass around it began to frost over, fogging from the inside. And then the voice returned. He fell. But never landed. Daniel blinked. The figure vanished. But the frost on the glass remained. And something had formed in the condensation, a single handprint. On the outside. That night, Daniel left the tower, pale, shaken, but oddly fascinated. He hadn't just experienced a haunting. He had been warned. And the next morning, when the groundskeeper opened the lighthouse for the day's tours, he found a fresh handprint, same size, same shape on the outer glass of the lantern room, over 160 feet above the ground. No ladders. No cranes. No signs of tampering. Just that print. And a faint whisper that drifted down the stairs like an echo caught in time. I keep the light. I never left. Let's continue with the second ghost story in the Whispers of the Ancient City series. This time, deep within the cold Caquina walls of one of St. Augustine's most iconic and haunted landmarks, the Castillo de San Marcos. Chapter 2. The Phantom of the Powder Room. The Castillo de San Marcos is a fortress built not just from stone, but from secrets. Its walls have stood for centuries, carved from Caquina, shell-rich limestone that has withstood cannon fire, pirate sieges, and time itself. But inside those walls, where the air stays damp even in summer, something else has endured. Something that was never supposed to leave. Our story begins with Sergeant Matthew Harlan, a National Guard member posted to St. Augustine in 2003. While off duty, he volunteered as an overnight historical security aide for the Castillo, a role most avoided. Not because of danger, but because of stories. Stories like the Powder Room apparition. According to legend, sometime in the early 1700s, a Spanish officer named Captain Manuel Abella vanished without a trace. Right within the fort. Some believed he fled with stolen gold. Others whispered that he had an affair with the wrong woman, possibly the wife of his superior, and disappeared for it. What no one expected was that, nearly 100 years later, during a structural survey of the old powder storage room, workers broke through a sealed wall and discovered two skeletons bricked into the chamber, still dressed in the tattered remains of colonial uniforms. Since that discovery, strange sounds, muffled cries, scraping, and sudden cold spots had been reported in and around the powder room, particularly after dark. Sergeant Harlan didn't believe in ghosts. At least not at first. His shift began just after midnight, long after the last tourists had wandered off. The Castillo loomed, lit dimly by floodlights, casting long shadows against the Matanzas Bay. His job was simple. Patrol the perimeter, check the exhibits, and log any unusual activity. At around 2:30 a.m., he made his way down the inner corridor leading toward the powder room. That's when his radio crackled, even though no one else was on duty. A voice. Garbled. Barely a whisper. He's in the wall. Matthew stopped. Say again. Dispatch, do you copy? Static. He lowered the radio. The corridor suddenly felt tighter. The temperature had dropped. And then he heard it. A faint tapping from the powder room door, like someone gently knocking from the inside. He drew his flashlight and approached, each step echoing louder than it should. The wooden door to the old munitions storage room was locked. Thick. Reinforced. The tapping continued. Is someone in there? He called, more out of duty than belief. Then silence. He waited. 5 seconds. 10. He turned to leave. Bang. A full slam from the other side of the door. He jumped back, flashlight flickering. When the beam steadied, he saw something impossible. A glowing imprint of a hand, pressed against the stone just beside the door. No heat, no moisture. Just a luminous mark that slowly faded into the wall. Matthew should have called for backup. He should have left. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, drew him to unlock the door. Inside, the powder room was just as it always was. Dusty, stale, empty. But then his light caught it. Scratch marks on the interior wall. Not just a few. Dozens. Deep gouges carved into the Caquina, some in patterns. And beside them, etched faintly in Spanish. No hay salida. Aidem. There is no way out. Help me. He stepped backward, then froze. From the corner of the room, a figure emerged. Not stepped. Emerged. It was translucent, dressed in a faded officer's coat, face partially sunken, eyes hollow but locked on his own. The spirit raised one hand and pointed. Not at Matthew, but at the wall. Then the lights went out. Only silence. When backup arrived later that morning, they found Matthew unconscious on the floor, no visible wounds. The flashlight was still clutched in his hand, flickering. He claimed to have been pushed, but no injury supported it. What they did find was more unsettling. The handprint had returned. And this time, it glowed in daylight. Until they watched it vanish, as if it had never been there at all. Today, the powder room is still part of the public tour. The scratch marks are long since covered. But on especially humid nights, guests still claim to feel a chill as they walk past that part of the corridor. Some say they hear tapping from behind the stone. And if you're brave or foolish enough to press your ear to the wall, you might still hear it. Adam. Let's continue with the third ghost story in the Whispers of the Ancient City series. This time, at the Tolomado Cemetery, where we come across the girl in white. Chapter 3. The Girl in White. Tolomado Cemetery. Hidden behind iron gates and shaded by gnarled oaks and weeping Spanish moss, Tolomado Cemetery rests quietly along Cordova Street. At a glance, it appears serene. Rows of above-ground tombs, crumbling markers, and sunlit crosses create a picturesque final resting place. But appearances can be deceiving. Tolomado is closed to the public. Officially, no one is allowed inside the cemetery's gates. Unofficially, locals will tell you the dead don't care about permits. The legend. One of the oldest cemeteries in the United States, Tolomado was once a burial ground for Spanish Catholics, native converts, and freed slaves. Over 1,000 people are believed to be buried there, many in unmarked or sunken graves. Some say not all were buried properly or willingly. But no story echoes through the city's haunted circles quite like the tale of Luciana Morales, known by locals simply as the Girl in White. She was just 14 when she died, in the mid-1800s, of yellow fever. Her family, new immigrants from Cuba, were devastated. But it's what happened after her burial that gave rise to the ghost story. They buried her in a white communion dress. Her final request. And on the day of her funeral, a torrential storm struck. Mourners claimed the wind howled louder than the priest's prayers. Some swore they heard crying. Not from the mourners, but from the coffin. Days later, the grave digger who had helped bury her was found dead in his quarters. His journal lay beside him. It read, "She was standing at the gate, asking to be let out." A modern encounter. Fast forward to 2016. Alicia Romero, a photography student at Flagler College, had been working on a project about historical cemeteries. She and her friend Jason decided to shoot outside Tolomado's fence after dark. Purely for artistic lighting, she insisted. As they set up their tripod along the sidewalk, Alicia noticed something in the viewfinder. A shape. Blurred. Pale. She adjusted her focus. There. A girl, maybe 13 or 14, dressed in white, standing inside the cemetery gates. Hands clasped, head tilted, watching. Alicia blinked, looked up. No one was there. She looked back through the lens. The girl was closer. Jason swore he saw nothing, but Alicia was trembling. She snapped 3 shots in quick succession. Then her camera died. Full battery, totally drained. "I want to leave," she said, and they left right away. Later that night, she reviewed the images. The first photo showed only tombs. The second had a faint blur near the gate. But the third. In the third, the girl was crystal clear, eyes closed, as if in prayer or mourning. And behind her, barely visible, was a hand reaching out from behind a tree, blackened, bony. Alicia deleted the photo. But her camera would never work again. Every photo she took afterward showed fog, even indoors. Ongoing sightings. Today, passers-by sometimes see the girl in white pacing near the back of the cemetery at dusk. Others hear soft sobbing when no one is near. Tour guides avoid standing too long at Tolomado's front gate, especially around midnight. And sometimes, if you press your hand to the iron fence, you'll feel it. A sudden chill, like someone pressing back. Some say Luciana Morales is looking for someone to open the gate. Others believe she's trying to keep something in. Let's continue this chilling journey through St. Augustine's haunted past with Chapter 4. This time, stepping into one of its most notoriously disturbing landmarks, the Old Jail. Chapter 4. Shackled Shadows. The Haunting of the Old Jail. At the northern edge of St. Augustine's historic district, behind its deceptively cheerful pink facade, stands the Old Jail. A relic of rough justice and hard punishment. Built in 1891, it looks almost charming from the outside, with turrets and brickwork that could pass for a quirky hotel. But inside, it's another world entirely. Narrow hallways, rusted iron bars, and dark solitary cells hold echoes of cries long silenced. The Old Jail was never just a place of confinement. It was a place of suffering, violence, and death. And some say, it still is. History carved in iron. Built under the eye of industrialist Henry Flagler, the jail was meant to be far from the luxurious image he wanted for his nearby hotels. It housed up to 72 prisoners at a time. Some for petty theft, others for violent crimes. Conditions were brutal. Disease ran rampant. Executions were carried out in the courtyard, sometimes without trial. It said that at least 8 official hangings took place at the gallows outside. Unofficially, locals believe many more souls met their end behind those bars. One of them was Elias Ironhand Harper, a drifter accused of murdering a sheriff's deputy in 1914. The trial was swift. The noose was readied. But just before his execution, Elias shouted something from the gallows. "Chain me in death, and I'll walk this place forever." His body dropped, but his threat lingered. A midnight encounter. In 2007, a rookie night watchman named Reggie Parks was hired to do routine after-hours checks at the Old Jail. It wasn't supposed to be haunted duty. Just locking up after ghost tours had finished. One night, around 2 a.m., he entered the main cell block, flashlight in hand. The air was thick. Still. As he walked past the solitary cells, he heard it. The unmistakable sound of metal dragging against stone. He stopped. Turboprops, he told himself. Then it happened again. Clink. Drag. Clink. Drag. It was coming from cell 3. The same one where Harper had been held before execution. Reggie approached the door slowly. The cell was empty. Then, a loud clang rang out behind him. He spun. Nothing there. He turned back to the cell. And that's when he saw it. Chains. Heavy iron shackles were now lying across the floor. Not there a moment before. He reached for the flashlight. It flickered, then failed. In the dim glow from the hallway light, Reggie saw a shape. A tall figure with something gleaming around its wrists. Stepped from the back wall of the cell. The figure's head tilted, as if studying him. Then, in a low voice that seemed to come from underneath the air. "Still walking. Just like I said." Reggie didn't remember leaving the building. His next memory was sitting on the curb outside, trembling, with jail keys still in his hand. He never returned. Strange occurrences today. Visitors and tour guides still report sudden cold spots in cell 3. Heavy footsteps in the upstairs corridor long after tours have ended. Jail cell doors slamming shut on their own. The smell of sweat and blood where there should be only dust. And most famously, several guests have captured photos showing a shadowy figure gripping the bars with unnaturally long arms, face hidden by shadow, and wrists wrapped in chains. No reenactor was present. No actor had been hired. The photo now hangs in the lobby. Some tour guides won't even go near cell 3 without a partner. They say Ironhand Harper is still there, shackled in death, just like he promised. Let's step into chapter 5 of our chilling St. Augustine anthology. This time into a place filled with pain, whispers, and surgical shadows. The Spanish Military Hospital. Chapter 5. The Surgeon's Prayer. Spanish Military Hospital. Tucked away along Avila Street, one of the oldest streets in America, sits the Spanish Military Hospital Museum. Today, it presents itself as a fascinating slice of medical history. Glimpse into the tools, treatments, and procedures used in 18th century colonial life. But what most daytime visitors don't realize is that the ground beneath their feet has seen centuries of suffering. Blood spilled, limbs removed, souls broken. It was never just a hospital. It was a place of last breaths. And some of them never exhaled their final one. Echoes from the ward. The original hospital, part of the second Spanish colonial period, was used to treat soldiers suffering from gunshot wounds, gangrene, dysentery, and worse. There were no anesthetics, no sterilization, and no gentle hands. In some cases, survival rates were low enough that doctors prepared the last rites before surgeries began. One such doctor was Alejandro Vivar, a military surgeon rumored to have been both a skilled physician and a harsh, unfeeling man. He believed pain built character. And worse, he believed not all patients were worth saving. Records suggest that in his final years, Alejandro began operating alone at night. After hours, when no nurses or orderlies were present, his notes became cryptic. He spoke of saving more than just lives. Then, one night, he vanished. No body. No sign of departure. His scalpel was found in the basin, still stained. The night shift. Fast forward to the early 1990s. Laura Jensen, a museum curator and local history buff, was helping catalog newly unearthed artifacts in the lower treatment rooms. It was after 10 p.m. when she realized she hadn't locked the front doors. She went to do so, but on her return, the temperature had dropped by nearly 20 degrees. Her breath came out in white plumes. Then she heard it. A metallic tapping, like a tool being laid out on a tray. She called out, expecting a staff member to still be inside. Silence. She stepped into the treatment room, and what she saw made her freeze. The surgical table was no longer empty. Laid across it was a dark shadow, faintly outlined. Arms at its side. And beside it, a man in a long coat, back turned, sharpening a blade. Laura backed away, heart racing. As she turned to flee, the shadowed surgeon stopped sharpening. He slowly turned his head not all the way. Just enough. And whispered, still strong enough to feel the pain. The room went black. When Laura came to, she was lying outside the front doors, unsure how she got there. The museum alarm never triggered. The lights inside had been turned off. She left her job the following week. Unexplained events. To this day, museum staff and tour guides report shadows seen moving across the treatment room, even when no one is inside. Unaccounted footsteps pacing between exam tables. A smell of burnt herbs and blood wafting from rooms that haven't been opened. Sudden whispers in Spanish, saying things like "Prepáralo, prepare him," or "Demasiado tard, too late." Most chilling are the photos. Visitors occasionally capture images of the treatment room showing surgical instruments floating in midair. Or a blurred figure in a surgeon's apron standing over the table, even when the room is empty. The guides say Dr. Vivar never left. He's still there, searching for the worthy, testing pain, and continuing his work in the quiet shadows of history. So if you visit after dark and feel a sudden chill while standing near the operating table, don't turn around. He hates interruptions. It's time to continue our journey with Chapter 6 of Whispers of the Ancient City, where we explore one of the most haunted cemeteries in the southeast. A resting place that was denied spiritual peace from the beginning. Chapter 6. The Watcher at the Gate. Huguenot Cemetery. Just outside the original city gates of St. Augustine lies the Huguenot Cemetery, established in 1821. Enclosed by a wrought iron fence and shaded by centuries-old oaks, it holds the remains of over 400 people. Victims of yellow fever, paupers, and Protestants who were not allowed to be buried in Catholic grounds. From the start, it was a place of exclusion. A burial ground for the unwanted. A final resting place for those denied rights, denied prayers, and, some say, denied peace. This cemetery does not sleep. A cemetery of the forgotten. When yellow fever swept through St. Augustine in the early 1800s, the city struggled to find space to bury the mounting dead. Bodies piled up faster than graves could be dug. Coffins were laid side by side, sometimes unmarked, often unnamed. One of the most famous spirits said to linger here is that of Judge John Stickney, whose story is both tragic and deeply unsettling. Stickney was a well-respected judge and community leader in the late 1800s. After his death, his body was buried with honors at Huguenot Cemetery. But years later, when his children moved north, they decided to exhume his remains and transport them closer to the family. It was during this process, so the legend goes, that something went wrong. Very wrong. The workers carrying his coffin were said to have stopped for a break outside the cemetery gates. As they did, someone, or something, stole the judge's gold dental work from the open coffin. Since that day, Judge Stickney is said to walk the inside of the cemetery gates, never at peace, searching for what was taken from him. The paranormal encounter. In 2011, two amateur ghost hunters, Melissa and Craig, locals from Jacksonville, snuck into the cemetery just after midnight. They were armed with EMF detectors, voice recorders, and an old Canon camera. They didn't get far. Near the gate, Craig's EMF detector began to spike wildly. The air around them turned icy, even in the humid summer heat. Melissa turned to say something, but Craig wasn't there. He had walked ahead to the judge's grave. She heard whispering. Not Craig. Not a voice she recognized. She approached him, slowly, only to find him standing perfectly still, eyes wide, staring at the iron fence. "Do you see him?" he whispered. She followed his gaze. There, standing just beyond the bars, was a man in an old black coat and cravat, holding a wide-brimmed hat in one hand. He was staring directly at them, not blinking. And then, he was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just vanished into mist. Craig never went back. Melissa shared the photo she managed to snap moments before. One that shows a faint figure near the gate with an unnatural distortion around the face, as if the film itself refused to capture him. Who is the Watcher? Some believe it's Judge Stickney, wandering in search of the piece of himself that was stolen. Others believe he guards the gate, not to protect the dead, but to warn the living not to disturb what rests beyond. Even today, the cemetery's iron gates are said to rattle late at night, though no wind stirs. People walking past after dark report seeing a man standing silently just behind the bars, vanishing the moment you blink. And if you linger too long. Some claim to hear a soft voice whisper from behind the stones, "Return what was mine." Let's continue with Chapter 7 of Whispers of the Ancient City. This time moving into the oldest residential street in the United States, Aviles Street. Beneath its charm lies a shadowy past of broken hearts, betrayal, and lingering spirits. Chapter 7. the widow of Aviles Street. By day, Aviles Street is warm and inviting. A narrow cobblestone lane lined with art galleries, boutiques, and cafes. Its European architecture and colonial charm feel plucked from another era. But by night, the street changes. The lanterns seem to flicker a little harder in the wind. Shadows fall where they shouldn't. And for those who walk alone after dark, there's often a feeling that they're being followed. The locals speak softly about the widow of Aviles Street, a spirit seen drifting through the fog near the old stone archways and shuttered windows. Her presence is marked by perfume, sorrow, and the sound of sobbing that comes and goes on the wind. The story behind the spirit. In the early 1800s, a woman named Isabella Ferrer lived in a modest home near the corner of Aviles and Cadiz. Her husband, Captain Elias Ferrer, was a Spanish merchant sailor known for long absences at sea. They were deeply in love, and each time he returned, he brought with him gifts, letters, and stories from across the Atlantic. But during his last voyage, he never came home. His ship was caught in a hurricane. Wreckage washed up weeks later along the coast near the Matanzas Inlet. Isabella refused to believe he was gone. Every night for months, she lit a lantern and stood by her upstairs window overlooking the street, waiting, praying, whispering his name into the night. Eventually, her light went out. And so did she. Alone, grief-stricken, and forgotten, Isabella died in that house, her heart still tethered to the man who never returned. The home was sold, then abandoned, later torn down. But Isabella stayed. The modern sightings. Today, shop owners and residents along Aviles have reported soft weeping echoing in the alleyways, usually around 2 a.m. A faint light glowing from an invisible upstairs window on a lot where no house stands. A woman in a long black dress appearing just outside gallery doors, then vanishing before the bell rings. One story comes from Elena Ruiz, who ran a small ceramic shop near the site of Isabella's former home. One evening, while closing up, Elena looked up from her cash register to see a woman standing at the door. She had her back to the street. Dark hair, black veil, pale hands pressed to the glass. Elena called out, "We're closed, ma'am." The woman didn't move. Elena stepped closer. And then, the woman turned. There was no face. Just shadows beneath the veil. The door never opened, but the scent of lavender and sea salt filled the shop for hours. Elena now keeps a candle in her window, just in case Isabella is still searching for a lantern. The ghost light of Aviles. Some paranormal investigators have set up night cameras to capture the strange orb of light that appears mid-street and glides toward the bay. It's often thought to be Isabella's lantern, still burning as she waits for her lost husband. But others claim it's not a welcoming light. It's a warning. A will-o'-the-wisp meant to lure lost souls into following her, never to return. If you ever walk Aviles Street at night and smell lavender on the breeze or hear distant sobbing carried on the wind, don't follow the light. Look up. If you see a window where no building stands and someone staring out of it, walk faster. Let's continue with Chapter 8 of Whispers of the Ancient City. This time, we leave the cobblestones behind and cross into the misty waters of the Bridge of Lions. A gateway not only between the historic and modern sides of St. Augustine, but, some say, between the living and the dead. Chapter 8. The Guardians of the Fog. Bridge of Lions. The Bridge of Lions is a breathtaking structure connecting downtown St. Augustine to Anastasia Island. It's guarded by two majestic marble lions, firm and faithful, meant to symbolize protection and strength. But as any longtime local will tell you, those lions don't just guard the city, they watch it. Built in the 1920s and restored in the early 2000s, the bridge has long been a place of passage. Sailors, soldiers, travelers, and, more than once, those who never made it to the other side. What makes this bridge different isn't just the architecture. It's the veil that seems to hang over it, especially on foggy nights, when the bay turns silver and quiet. That's when they say the guardians walk. The story beneath the stone. One of the earliest legends tied to the Bridge of Lions dates back to 1932, shortly after its completion. A car was said to have plunged off the edge during a storm. 3 passengers inside. Their bodies were never recovered. Locals whispered that the bridge didn't just collapse, it took them. Years later, construction workers doing maintenance claimed to hear footsteps behind them. Heavy, booted, and always stopping when they turned around. One night, a crewman named Wes Heller was working alone on the bridge's machinery at the Eastern Tower. Just before midnight, he radioed in, "Someone's up here with me. I think they jumped the gate." Then silence. When backup arrived minutes later, they found Wes staring at the water. Unmoving, pale, and shaking. He said he saw a man in a naval coat standing on the edge, face dripping wet, eyes completely black. Wes swore the man whispered, "The water never forgets. The lions that watch." Now here's where the legend gets darker. There are those who believe that the stone lions themselves are enchanted. Wardens placed at the ends of the bridge to keep something from crossing. According to an old gullah tale passed down through island families, lions in the afterlife are protectors against restless souls. And sometimes, even they struggle. Several pedestrians over the decades have reported the same experience. Crossing the bridge at dusk, seeing a figure on the pedestrian path, slowly walking toward them. The figure vanishes before they pass. And in the moments after, they hear a growl, low and rumbling, like a large animal is just behind them. One woman claimed she dropped her phone when she heard it. When she turned around, she saw a paw print. Larger than any dog's. Pressed into the concrete behind her. But when she looked again, it was gone. She doesn't walk the bridge anymore. The Man in the Mist. Perhaps the most famous spirit of the Bridge of Lions is known simply as the Man in the Mist. Described as tall, soaked, and expressionless, he's seen most often when the water fog rises thick over the bridge. One police officer, Lieutenant Donovan Myers, responded to what he thought was a jumper on the railing one early morning. As he approached, the figure didn't turn. Just stood with arms at his side. When Donovan got within 10 feet, the man finally turned and walked straight off the side of the bridge. Donovan rushed forward, expecting to hear a splash, but there was nothing. The water was calm. The man had disappeared. No ripple, no trace. And just before the mist cleared, Donovan swore he saw the lion statues, blinking. A word of warning. If you walk the Bridge of Lions on a foggy night and see a figure ahead of you, don't follow it. And if you hear something heavy pacing just behind your steps, don't turn around. The lions may protect the city from spirits crossing in, but they can't always stop what wants out. In Chapter 9 of Whispers of the Ancient City, we step through the grand archways of a place that once hosted the wealthy elite of the Gilded Age. But beneath the marble floors and Tiffany glass, something ancient still stirs. Welcome to the haunted heart of St. Augustine's elegance, Flagler College. Chapter 9. Echoes in the Marble. The Ghosts of Flagler College. Today, Flagler College is a thriving liberal arts school with stunning architecture, its centerpiece the former Hotel Ponce de Leon, built in 1888 by railroad magnate Henry Flagler. With its Spanish Renaissance revival design, soaring domes, and lavish interiors, the hotel was once a winter haven for America's most powerful families. But behind its luxury lay secrets of illness, isolation, heartbreak, and death. And those who have stayed behind haven't forgotten. The hotel that became a tomb. When the hotel was operational, it was more than just elegant. It was exclusive. Entire wings were reserved for high society families. Servants worked around the clock, but guests sometimes disappeared for days. Those who fell ill were quietly moved to private rooms and never seen again. Flagler, obsessed with perfection, reportedly sealed off rooms where guests had died, having them walled up or converted into closets. No records were kept, no memorials. And after Flagler's death in 1913, things only got stranger. Workers reported seeing lights in sealed rooms, hearing typewriters clicking in unused offices, and footsteps pacing down hallways long after they were closed. The woman in the red dress. The most famous spirit on campus is known simply as the Lady in Red. She's often seen drifting along the third floor of Ponce Hall, where her heels echo even on carpeted floors. Always in a deep crimson gown, hair perfectly styled, face pale and distant. Some say she was a former guest, possibly a socialite who threw herself from the balcony after receiving a telegram that her fiancé had died in the war. One student, Natalie Mendez, swore she saw the woman late one night while returning from the library. She turned a corner and found a woman in red walking ahead of her. Graceful, slow, barefoot. Natalie tried to call out, but the woman didn't respond. Then, without turning, the woman walked straight through a closed door. Natalie never returned to that wing again. The basement beneath the Beauty. The hotel's basement is off limits to students. Originally used for service tunnels, laundry, and coal storage, it has now become the source of whispered stories. Maintenance crews refuse to go down alone. One janitor, Luis, told a fellow staffer that while fixing a pipe leak, he heard children giggling behind him. When he turned around, there was nothing but darkness. Later that night, he returned to retrieve his tools and found something written in the condensation on a boiler tank. "We still play here." There are no child graves recorded under Flagler College. But there is evidence that sick children were kept in underground quarters during yellow fever outbreaks, hidden from the guests. The clock tower mystery. And then there's the Flagler Clock Tower, sealed from public access. Legend says that Henry Flagler himself commissioned a secret room inside the tower. Some claim he used it to store priceless artifacts. Others say he came here to communicate with the dead, particularly his daughter, Jenny, who died in 1889. Students have reported hearing a woman crying softly from above during thunderstorms. Lightning often strikes near the tower more than anywhere else in the city. Coincidence, or something else? In 2015, a photography major tried to capture long exposure shots of the tower. He later found that every image showed a blurred figure in the top window, despite it being completely sealed shut. Graduation and goodbye. Several students have shared the same story on their graduation day. Just as they cross the front rotunda for the last time, they feel a hand touch their shoulder. Light, warm, and unmistakably real. When they turn, no one is there. Some believe it's Flagler himself, bidding farewell to those who respected his legacy. Others believe it's a gentle warning. Some places never let you go completely. And Chapter 10 of Whispers of the Ancient City, we leave the grandeur of Flagler's empire and step into a more intimate, forgotten corner of St. Augustine. A historic home sealed in silence, its story whispered through bricks and broken hearts. Welcome to the haunting of Casa de la Paz. Chapter 10. The Morning Room. Casa de la Paz. Just a few blocks off the main plaza, nestled behind swing palms and half-crumbling garden walls, stands a house many locals walk past without a second glance. There's no official marker. No grand tours. Just a modest Spanish-style home from the 1700s, weathered but defiant. They call it Casa de la Paz. House of Peace. But the peace, it seems, was only meant for the surface. Those who have lived there, and those who have dared spend the night, Speak of rooms that whisper back, a cold presence in the parlor, and the unmistakable sound of someone breathing when you're the only one in the room. It all began with a wall that shouldn't have been there. The bricked-in secret. In 1928, the house was undergoing renovations when workers discovered an unusual partition. A brick wall that sealed off what appeared to be a small storage space. Thinking they had found an old pantry or possibly a servant's passage, they knocked it down. Inside, they found a single wooden chair, rotted almost to splinters, and a porcelain doll, perfectly preserved, seated with its hands in its lap. On the wall, written in something faded but organic, were the words, "No más lantos. No más ruido. No more crying. No more noise." The homeowner at the time, a woman named Estela Navarro, dismissed it as an old family relic. But within weeks, the house changed. Doors slammed on their own. Cold spots appeared in the exact footprint of the sealed room. Visitors complained of being watched from the corner of the ceiling, though nothing could be seen. And every night, at exactly 3:03 a.m., the sound of weeping echoed through the halls. Who was she? Records uncovered in the early 1980s suggest that in the early 1800s, the house belonged to Sebastian and Lydia Rojas, a wealthy couple with a single daughter, Catalina. Letters from the period, recovered in a nearby archive, reveal a disturbing truth. Catalina suffered from seizures and was prone to fits of screaming. Episodes that were misunderstood and feared. Embarrassed and paranoid about the social shame her condition brought, Sebastian reportedly kept her hidden in a room at the back of the house. Over time, that room was sealed entirely. Her only companion, the doll. She was never listed in the burial records. No official death. Just silence. And perhaps, she never left. The paranormal returns. In 2012, the house was briefly rented as an Airbnb. One guest, a nurse named Erica Mathers, left after a single night. She claimed to have been awoken by the sound of footsteps in her room and a soft giggle, like a child nearby. Thinking it was a neighbor's child, she tried to ignore it. Then the closet door opened. Inside was nothing but a porcelain doll, lying face down on the floor. When Erica picked it up and placed it on the shelf, she noticed the same phrase scratched lightly into the wood beneath. No más ruido. She left that night without her deposit. Since then, the house has remained empty. Locals walk around it. Kids dare each other to touch the door, but few do. Those who have been inside speak of mirrors fogging without reason, child-sized handprints on the windows, and a humming voice that stops the moment you listen for it. Final note. If you ever find yourself near Casa de la Paz and hear weeping behind the stucco walls, don't knock. If you see a doll sitting in the window when no one's lived there in years, don't wave. And if you hear someone whisper "be quiet" when you're alone, don't make a sound. We now arrive at chapter 11 of Whispers of the Ancient City. For this tale, we turn to one of the most iconic and deceptively cheerful landmarks in St. Augustine. A place where the chalkboards have long been wiped clean, but the lessons never truly stopped. Welcome to the haunted halls of the oldest wooden schoolhouse. Chapter 11. The Bell Never Stops. Oldest wooden schoolhouse. Nestled beneath the spreading limbs of an ancient oak, bound with chains to survive hurricanes, stands a quaint, curious structure. The oldest wooden schoolhouse in the United States. To tourists, it's a charming photo op. A creaky relic of 18th century education, complete with wax figures, antique desks, and the steady ticking of a long silent classroom. But locals, especially those who have worked late locking up after the crowds are gone, speak in hushed tones about what happens after dark. Because after sunset, this cheerful schoolhouse becomes something else entirely. And there is a bell that never truly stopped ringing. A history written in whispers. The school was built in the early 1700s, back when St. Augustine was still a colonial outpost. It was one of the first schools in the colonies to teach boys and girls together, something progressive for the time. Lessons included reading, writing, Spanish, English, and religious instruction. But while the classroom above was filled with learning, the cellar beneath held punishment. Records suggest that students who misbehaved weren't sent home. They were sent below, into the crawlspace beneath the floorboards. For hours. Sometimes overnight. No light. No blankets. Just the musty dark and the echo of the school bell overhead. One student, Thomas Welch, never made it back. The journal of the old schoolmaster, Reverend Edwin Hale, contains a single line dated April 3, 1781. Discipline was required today. Thomas tested me. The darkness will correct him. Thomas, age 9, was never seen again. Hale claimed he'd run away. But no one searched. It was a different time. Years later, while restoring the cellar, workers found a small cloth shoe, a wooden button, and deep in the stone corner, a child's fingernail embedded in the wall. The restoration stopped. The cellar was sealed. The bell was removed from the tower and placed inside. No longer rung. But every so often, it rings anyway. The unscheduled ringing. Staff members have reported the bell sounding softly in the middle of the night, though it's not connected to any working mechanism. Others have heard scratching from beneath the floorboards, as if something or someone is still trying to claw their way out. In 2004, a paranormal group was granted after-hours access. They placed audio recorders and motion sensors in the classroom. At 2:03 a.m., all 3 motion sensors went off at once. And then came a sound, the creak of a chair moving, followed by a faint voice. "I didn't mean to cheat." The next morning, they reviewed the footage. A small wooden chair, untouched, tilted forward and slid 2 inches across the floor on its own. No one was near it. A teacher who never left. Visitors have also described seeing a woman in black, dressed in colonial garb, standing just beyond the velvet rope in the classroom. She appears to be writing on the chalkboard, her face hidden beneath a mourning veil. She never reacts. She never turns. But if you look away and look back, she's gone. One night guard, Raymond Morris, quit after just 2 shifts. He swore that as he walked past the schoolhouse, he heard the bell ring once. Then he saw light through the upper window, and a classroom full of shadowed figures, sitting perfectly still. When he unlocked the door and burst inside, there was nothing. Just the wax figures. The silence. And one fresh line of chalk, now scrawled across the board. "I won't talk in class again." The cellar remains closed. The cellar has been locked and sealed for decades. No tours go down there. Even staff refuse to enter. But sometimes, if you press your ear to the floorboards, you can still hear faint tapping. Rhythmic. Like fingers on a desk. Or worse, nails on stone. So if you ever visit the oldest wooden schoolhouse and hear the bell chime, though it hasn't worked in 100 years, don't follow the sound. And whatever you do, don't be late. With dread and delight, we now enter Chapter 12 of Whispers of the Ancient City. This tale takes us back to the formidable Castillo de San Marcos, not to its ramparts or cells this time but to something beneath it. An old stone corridor, a sealed chamber, a forgotten pirate, and a curse that never died. Chapter 12. The Pirate's Curse Beneath the Castillo. The Castillo de San Marcos is no stranger to stories. Its thick walls have survived sieges, fire, cannonballs, and centuries of whispered legends. But not all of its ghosts wear military uniforms. Some wore sashes and sabers, with gold in their pockets and blood on their hands. And one of them, they say, was buried alive beneath the fortress. Cursed, betrayed, and still waiting. The pirate known as El Silencio His real name was lost, but Spanish records refer to him simply as El Silencio. The Silence. Captured sometime in the early 1700s after raiding ships off the Florida coast, El Silencio was infamous not just for his ruthlessness, but for the fact that he never spoke a single word during his trial or imprisonment. No plea. No confession. Nothing. He was rumored to have hidden an enormous treasure. Spanish gold and blood diamonds. Somewhere near St. Augustine. And despite the interrogations, beatings, and starvation, he never revealed a word of its location. Frustrated and furious, the Spanish officers gave him one final punishment. If you will not speak, then you will be buried with your silence. According to an account discovered in a forgotten Spanish ledger, El Silencio was chained inside a narrow tunnel beneath the Castillo, bricked in, and left to die in the dark. They say the last sound the guards heard wasn't a scream, but a soft, cruel laugh. The Discovery and the Curse. In 1949, during structural repairs after hurricane damage, engineers discovered a small, sealed archway beneath the Castillo. Far below the known tunnels. No records mentioned it. The air inside was stale. The ground was dry. Inside, they found bones, shackles, and a small pile of gold Spanish doubloons, blackened by time. They removed the coins, logged the bones, cleared the chamber. And then the nightmares began. Within months, 2 of the workers went missing under unexplained circumstances. Another was found dead in his home, his mouth sewn shut with black thread. The coins, sent to a museum in Tampa, were stolen within days, the guard on duty found unconscious. No memory of what happened. The site was resealed, the chamber forgotten again. Or so they thought. The return of the laugh. Night guards at the Castillo often speak of a strange echo heard only in the southern walls. A low, dry chuckle that travels like wine through the coquina. It doesn't respond to voice. It never repeats. One ranger, Luis Calderon, claims he was closing the fortress one evening when he found a trail of damp footprints. Bare, and far too wide to belong to a child. Leading toward the sealed stairwell. He followed the prints until they vanished. But something else was left behind. A single blackened coin, warm to the touch. That night, he dreamed of a figure in chains, crouched in darkness, smiling without a face. The curse lies on. Paranormal groups have investigated, but none have lasted long in the southern tunnel chambers. One group reported their digital audio recorded constant laughing, despite the room being silent. A whispered phrase repeats in Spanish. Aquí muero, aquí espero. Here I die, here I wait. Visitors who try to press too close to the southern walls often complain of ringing ears, nausea, or visions of a figure watching them from the cracks. And the treasure. Never found. If you walk through the Castillo and feel drawn to the southeast wall, resist the urge. That urge is not yours. And if you find a coin on the ground, old and warm and blackened with age, don't pick it up. That laugh you hear behind you. It's not in your head. It's in the walls. With every chapter, the shadows in St. Augustine grow darker. In chapter 13 of Whispers of the Ancient City, we step away from the grandeur of forts and schools and into something quieter, humbler, and far more intimate. A house by the old city gates, long since abandoned. Once a refuge, then a boarding house. Then a mystery sealed with silence. Welcome to the Spanish boarding house, where guests once checked in to dream, and some never woke up at all. Chapter 13. Last room on the left. The Spanish boarding house. Just beyond the stone arches of St. Augustine's old city gates, there once stood a simple home with crooked shutters, a tiled roof, and the smell of rosemary in the air. It became known as La Posada de los Sueños, the Inn of Dreams. A small Spanish boarding house in the late 1700s, operated by a woman named Marisol Dominguez. She was known for her hospitality. Travelers praised her food, her kindness, her quiet charm, and her sleeping tonic, a special herbal brew she gave to all overnight guests, meant to ease the aches of long journeys. Most slept soundly. Some slept forever. The vanishing guests. City records from the period are riddled with inconsistencies. Bookings that didn't match occupancy. Names without departure logs. Letters sent home saying loved ones had arrived in St. Augustine, only to vanish from all trace. The house was never suspected. Not officially. But in 1811, a local magistrate finally launched an inquiry. What he found in the cellar turned the town cold. Dozens of unmarked graves, stacked vertically beneath the stone floor, all untouched by illness or injury. Their expressions frozen not in fear, but in confusion, as though they had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. Marisol was gone, fled, dead, no one ever knew. But a room remained untouched, her journal left behind, its last page written in charcoal. They dreamed too deep. I only meant to help them rest. The last room. The house was abandoned, then sold, then renovated into apartments. But one room, the last room on the left, upstairs, was always empty. Renters claimed it was too cold, that it felt wrong. In 1978, a couple bought the home and reopened it as a boutique inn. Their first guest in the last room, a writer from New York, traveling alone. She was found 2 days later, lying peacefully in bed, her face serene, but her eyes wide open. No sign of trauma, no toxins in her blood. Her last journal entry read, "The tea was lovely, but I keep hearing whispering, in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish." Sleep that never ends. Since then, no one has been able to stay in that room for more than a night. Guests report vivid dreams of drowning in silk. A soft woman's voice humming lullabies through the walls. A weight on their chest while they sleep. The overwhelming scent of rosemary and bitter herbs. A paranormal investigator, Caleb Voss, once stayed there to record any activity. He placed EMF detectors, sound recorders, and cameras. The footage shows Caleb lying down. At 2:33 a.m., the camera glitches. A shadow moves across the wall, with no source. And then, a voice, "Sleep, Nino mio, sleep." Caleb awoke the next morning, paralyzed from the waist down. No medical cause was found. He never investigated again. The room today. The house has changed hands many times. The room is permanently locked now. The key is kept in a drawer with a crucifix on top. Locals call it the dream room. And they say, if you walk past on a warm night, when the rosemary is in bloom, you might hear the creak of the shutters. And a soft voice singing from the darkness. "Dormit, mi amor. Dormit. Sleep, my love. Sleep." With a shiver and the weight of centuries pressing down, we now descend into chapter 14 of Whispers of the Ancient City. This time, we leave behind the well-lit streets and stone walls of St. Augustine's mainland, and venture across the water to a place where screams were once swallowed by the tide and history was buried beneath the marsh. This is the story of Rattlesnake Island, where the dead were left to rot, and something still waits beneath the moss. Chapter 14. The Gallows Marsh. Rattlesnake Island. To most, Rattlesnake Island is little more than a slip of land across the Matanzas River, best known today as the home of Fort Matanzas, a Spanish outpost built in the 1740s. Tourists visit for history and sunsets. But the locals know better. They know the name comes not from the snakes that slither through the palmettos, but from the way the wind hisses through the trees at night, like it's remembering something it was told to forget. Because before the fort was built, Rattlesnake Island was an execution ground. Justice in the marsh. During the colonial era, St. Augustine's main gallows were used sparingly. Public executions were a spectacle. Organized, attended, loud. But some deaths were not for show. Spies, traitors, deserters, dissidents. These were brought quietly across the river, often at night, to Rattlesnake Island. No trial. No priest. Just the gallows pole, the noose, and the sound of marsh water lapping against the boat. They called it the silent sentence. The bodies were left to hang. Some say they were never cut down. Others say they were dragged into the mud by something else. And even now, centuries later, that silence has teeth. A modern misstep. In 1995, a pair of amateur treasure hunters, Kevin Stokes and Marty Clark, set out to explore a patch of the island behind Fort Matanzas, looking for rumored pirate caches. Armed with metal detectors and a crude map, they arrived just before sunset. By 9 p.m., only one of them came back. Kevin. Soaking wet, wild-eyed, mute. He never spoke again. He spent the next 14 years in a care facility. He would only draw, over and over, a noose hanging from a crooked cypress tree. And once, when a nurse asked him gently what happened to Marty, Kevin handed her a single sheet of paper. On it were 5 words. He walked where they hang. What people hear. Park rangers and campers have reported strange sounds after dark. Chains rattling when no boats are near. Low, choking gasps. Whispers in Spanish. Some pleading, others angry. And the eerie groaning of wood, as if a noose were still swaying in the breeze. In 2013, a group of ghost hunters captured audio in the southern grove of the island. At 2:17 a.m., the microphone picked up unmistakable creaking, followed by a guttural voice saying, "Dame el peso. O tu alma. Give me the coin. Or your soul." There were no coins found. But the next morning, one of the investigators had a bruise in the shape of rope burn around his neck. Why you should never camp there. Occasionally, adventurous souls try to camp on Rattlesnake Island. Most are fine. But some report sleep paralysis, waking up unable to move, and hearing footsteps around their tent, followed by the tightening sensation of a rope around their chest. Others swear they've seen a line of shadowy figures, necks snapped to one side, walking slowly through the fog before vanishing near the mangroves. One man returned with photos. In one frame, a tree hangs over the water. In the next, there's a body swinging from it. In the third, the body is gone, but the reflection in the water is still there. The island remembers. There are no marked graves on Rattlesnake Island. No memorials. No records of the exact number of people executed there. But some say that's the problem. These spirits were forgotten on purpose. And when the living ignore the sins of the past, those sins rise, cold and wet, from the mud. So if you ever find yourself near the southern edge of the island and see a path that seems too dry, too open, too perfect, don't follow it. Because some paths weren't made by the living. And if you hear a branch creak behind you, don't look up. With reverence and unease, we now turn to chapter 15 of Whispers of the Ancient City. We enter a place where prayers echo beneath vaulted ceilings, where saints look down from stained glass, and where something ancient, sacred, and not entirely at peace stirs behind the silence of devotion. This is the story of the Cathedral Basilica of St. Augustine, where the line between the holy and the haunted is thinner than stained glass. Chapter 15. Light from the Grave. the basilica's secret vigil. The Cathedral Basilica of St. Augustine, completed in 1797, is a sanctuary of history and holiness. Its Spanish colonial walls rise over King Street, its bell tower ringing above red-tiled roofs, calling to worshippers and tourists alike. Inside, the air feels heavy, ancient, and quiet. Not just with reverence, but with watching. For this cathedral is the oldest in the United States, and it has seen every sorrow St. Augustine has endured. Wars, fires, epidemics, burials, and some say, resurrections. Beneath the altar. In 1887, renovations uncovered a crypt beneath the altar, the final resting place of several early bishops and priests, including Bishop Augustin Virot, the first bishop of St. Augustine. Their tombs were sealed with stone and prayer. The workers who uncovered them reported nothing unusual, except for one oddity: a candle that would not go out. It had been burning beside Bishop Virot's casket. There was no air in the sealed vault, no wick, no flame visible. But the chamber glowed faintly. No source, just soft, unwavering light. The candle was removed. The light stayed for 2 more days. The light that moves. Since then, strange glows have been seen throughout the church. A soft blue flame drifting near the confessional booth, only to vanish when approached. A warm golden light illuminating the pews during late-night choir practice, though all the lights are off. Glimmering spots on the wall near the reliquary that pulse in time with organ music, even when the instrument isn't playing. Parishioners believe the spirits of the clergy still walk the basilica, continuing their duties. But one spirit, they say, isn't peaceful: the shadow in the choir loft. The choir loft is the source of the church's oldest ghost story. In 1821, a young cantor named Mateo Alvarez reportedly collapsed during Mass, struck down by a sudden illness, or, some whispered, a jealous rival. His final words were, "I must sing the benediction, just once more." That night, the priest heard the benediction hymn echoing from the choir loft, sung in a trembling tenor voice. No one was there. Now, the loft is locked at night, but guards and caretakers say they still hear coughing, footsteps pacing above, the soft swell of an unfinished hymn trailing off just before the final note. And on rare nights, especially during storms, visitors have captured video of a figure standing behind the choir rail, clutching the edge with trembling hands, face turned down in sorrow. When asked, tour guides simply say, "Mateo still wants his final song." The mirror that was removed. Once, a decorative mirror hung in the vestry hallway, placed there in the early 1900s. But priests began noticing something strange. In the mirror, they'd see someone standing at the altar, even when the sanctuary was empty. Reflection candles would flicker, while the real one stood still. Most terrifying of all, some priests claimed they saw their own faces weeping, even as they stood expressionless. The mirror was quietly taken down and moved to storage. But it cracked on its own, in 3 perfect lines, forming a cross. It now lies in the church's underground archives, wrapped in black cloth. No one has unwrapped it since. Blessing or warning? Some say the spirits of the basilica are guardians, bishops who still serve the Lord, even in death. Others say something older was buried beneath the stones, long before the cathedral, long before Spanish colonists. That the land itself was sacred, or cursed. That not all light is holy, and not every voice raised in song comes from heaven. So if you visit the Cathedral Basilica and feel a hand on your shoulder while you pray, don't be afraid. But if you see light glowing from beneath the altar, or hear singing from the empty loft, do not answer, and do not sing along. With growing dread, we now approach chapter 16 of Whispers of the Ancient City. This time, we leave the lofty halls of churches and the stonework of colonial homes and wander into the weeds, past the beaten path, where only memory and myth remain. This is the story of the Coquina Well, where a voice still echoes from the deep, asking for help, though it may not want to be saved. Chapter 16. The Child Beneath the Stone. The Coquina Well. North of St. George Street, where the historic city thins into overgrowth and scattered ruins, there lies a small crumbling garden wall of old Coquina stone. Just barely noticeable from the sidewalk. Behind it, half buried in sand and moss, is a circular stone cover etched with a weathered carving of a lily. It is all that remains of the Ruiz estate, destroyed by fire in 1872. But the well remains. A narrow, ancient shaft. Hand-cut and sealed with iron hooks. Once used for drawing water, and once for burying a secret. The Ruiz tragedy. Don Emilio Ruiz was a respected apothecary in the mid-1800s. His journals, now stored in the St. Augustine Historical Society archives, tell of medicines, patients, and a daughter named Anna. Anna was 10, bright, playful, beloved by all. Until she vanished. It was said she fell ill in the summer of 1871, feverish, mumbling in her sleep, claiming to hear whispers in the walls. The Ruiz family sent for priests, doctors, even mystics. Nothing helped. On August 8, the family reported her missing. But no one recalled hearing screams or seeing her leave. A week later, Don Emilio sealed the well with his own hands. When asked why, he simply said, "The water is no longer clean, and neither is this place." The house burned the next spring. The cause, unknown. The voice from the well. The well sat forgotten for decades. Until 1961, when a group of teenagers stumbled upon it while cutting through the overgrown lot. One of them, Carla Dempsey, leaned close and shouted into the darkness for fun. "Hello? Anybody down there?" There was a pause. And then, a child's voice responded. "Yes, I'm still here." Carla laughed, thinking it a prank. Until the others swore they hadn't said a word. That night, she dreamed of a stone room, narrow and wet, where a girl with dark curls sat rocking beside a bucket, singing to herself in Spanish. When Carla woke, her hands were covered in dirt, her fingernails cracked. She never went near the well again. The modern haunting. Since then, locals say the Coquina Well is cursed. Residents near the overgrown lot report soft crying at night, rising from the earth. Lullabies in Spanish, whispered through the trees. A girl's voice asking, "Puid Sakarm? Can you get me out?" In 1987, a paranormal team attempted to lower a camera into the well. At 19 feet, the footage cut to static. The rope snapped. When retrieved, the cable was soaked. Not with water, but a thick black silt, like ash mixed with oil. There was no sign of flooding. No rain. Just the faint sound of laughter echoing from below. The warning on the stone. In 2004, a local historian clearing brush from the property discovered something etched in faint script on the inside of the Coquina cover. So worn it could barely be read. But after taking a graphite rubbing, the words were clear. "Do not let her out. She is not what she was." A final caution. If you find the old garden wall near the edge of the district, do not lift the stone. Do not speak into the darkness. And if you hear a girl ask for help, don't answer. Because that voice may not belong to Ana Ruiz anymore. And the thing in the well. It doesn't want to escape. It wants company. With the air growing heavier and the veil thinner, we now descend into chapter 17 of Whispers of the Ancient City. This tale does not belong to legend or recorded history. It was passed from porch to porch, whispered through doorways, and scribbled on the backs of old utility bills. It is a story people don't like to tell. Not because they don't believe it, but because they do. This is the tale of the murder house on Saragossa Street and the iron nail that keeps it shut. Chapter 17. The Nail in the Frame. Saragossa's silent house. Tucked behind the light and color of St. Augustine's main squares lies Saragossa Street. Quiet, narrow, residential. Most homes here are beautiful and colonial. But one stands neglected. The garden is overgrown. The shutters are nailed. The paint is faded beyond recognition. It doesn't show up on most maps. Google Earth blurs it. And on the front door, rusted into the center of the frame, is a single wrought iron nail, 4 inches long. Locals say you must never remove it, because that nail doesn't hold the door closed. It holds something in. The 1906 incident. The house was built in the late 1800s, originally home to a schoolteacher named Hiram Bell. According to old newspapers, Bell was well liked, if reclusive. But in 1906, something changed. He stopped coming to town. He covered every window with blankets. And at night, the neighbors began hearing chanting. Children walking home from school reported seeing strange symbols carved into the shutters. One girl, just 8 years old, claimed she saw someone watching her from the attic window, but not with human eyes. Then, one night in October, screams erupted from the house. The neighbors rushed over, but found the door locked tight. No one answered. Eventually, the sheriff broke it down. Inside, they found Hiram Bell, still alive, rocking in the hallway. He had carved a circle of blood around himself. In the bedroom, the walls were covered in writing. Not English, not Spanish. Something older. And on the ceiling, written in soot and what appeared to be ash, were the words. The door was opened. It won't close again. No bodies were found. But the furniture had been shredded from within. Every mirror was broken. And in the middle of the room, stood a wooden door frame, freestanding, untouched by flame. Its door wide open. The iron nail. Bell was taken away. The house was emptied. And a priest, his name lost to time, was brought from Havana. After 3 days of silence, the door was sealed. The priest drove a single nail into the frame and said only, "This will not undo it, but it will hold, if it's never removed." He then left the city. The nail has never been touched. But each generation in St. Augustine passes the story on. The voice in the frame. In 1993, 2 teenage boys dared each other to knock on the door. One knocked. The other pressed his ear against the wood. He heard breathing. When he stepped back, there was a handprint on the glass, on the inside. It was too large to be human. He never went near the house again. The windows that reflect too much. Though the windows are shuttered at certain angles, especially just before dusk, you can still catch your reflection in the dusty panes. But sometimes, the reflection blinks later than you do. One photographer swore that, in a photo taken of the front door, there was a figure standing just behind the glass. Tall, eyeless, mouth open in a perfect scream. But the photo corrupted before he could send it. The doorframe returns. In 2018, during a violent storm, the iron nail began to vibrate. Neighbors swore they heard it from across the street. And those brave, or foolish, enough to peek through the shutters, claimed that the old freestanding doorframe had returned to the hallway. And this time, It was glowing faintly blue. It stayed for 3 nights, then disappeared. But the nail, still there. Final warning. Some say the house was never haunted. That it's not a ghost. That Hiram Bell didn't invite a spirit, but a doorway. A thin place between our world and something older. Something that doesn't like being shut out. And that nail, it doesn't close the door, it just keeps it from swinging open. So if you ever walk past this house in Saragossa Street, don't knock. Don't listen. Don't touch the nail. Because the worst thing you could ever do is open the door that opens other doors. Let us now continue to chapter 18 of Whispers of the Ancient City. A story whispered on salty winds, rising with the tide and retreating with the fog. A story about drowning, not in water, but in memory. This is the tale of Salt Run, where the voices of the dead still rise with the moon. Chapter 18. The Singing Tide. Ghosts of Salt Run. Salt Run is a winding, brackish channel that curls between Anastasia Island and the barrier dunes that line the edge of St. Augustine. It's a haven for kayakers and fishermen, lined with seagrass and quiet trails. The wind here is constant. So is the silence. But if you listen, really listen, on certain nights when the tide turns and the sky turns copper, you'll hear them. Voices, singing. In a language no one speaks anymore. A forgotten shipwreck. In 1763, a Spanish supply vessel named La Paloma Gris was caught in a violent squall off the coast. It attempted to seek shelter by navigating into the shallow bends of Salt Run. But it was too large, the current too strong. The ship splintered against the Coquina Shoals, its cargo swallowed by the sea. Dozens of sailors were thrown into the water. Some bound in the hold, prisoners being transported to Cuba. The captain survived. His crew did not. He claimed that the men didn't drown, that they were dragged by something below. His report was dismissed as madness. The wreck was never recovered, but locals stopped fishing in Salt Run after that year. Entire nets went missing. Boats capsized on clear days. And every so often, a body would wash up. Skin pale, eyes open, mouths full of seawater and sand. The siren songs. For years, stories spread of ghostly singing coming from the water. Never in daylight, never at low tide, always after dark. One fisherman, anchored just beyond the marsh, claimed he heard a choir of women, their voices distant and melodic. A kayaker reported paddling past what looked like a figure in the water, motionless, watching from a distance. A local ranger swore he saw a man walking across the water, barefoot and silent, before vanishing with the fog. But the most chilling accounts are always the same. I didn't want to go to the water. I just started walking. The Lost Trio. In 2001, 3 teens took a small boat into Salt Run after midnight. On a dare to reach the far mangrove spit and carve their initials into the tree locals called El Silencio. Only one returned. He was found the next morning, lying on the sandbar, unconscious, drenched in salt. He had no memory of what happened, but scrawled into the wood of the mangrove tree, freshly etched, were the words, "She sings in the deep." And now they do, too. The 2 others were never found. Only their shoes, side by side, pointing toward the water. Modern warnings. Locals still avoid Salt Run after dark. The park rangers will politely discourage night walks and never give a reason. Tourists occasionally report hearing humming near the waterline, even when alone. If you walk the shore barefoot, some say you'll feel fingers under the sand, reaching. Just gently. testing. And once a year, on the anniversary of La Paloma Chris's wreck, a low fog rolls inland from the channel. Some claim to see a broken mast in the fog. Others swear they see faces just beneath the surface, singing. Not crying for help. Not warning. Just singing. A final note. If you must walk Salt Run at night, bring no music. Don't speak to the water. And if you hear singing, do not follow it. Even if it sounds like someone you know. Even if it calls your name. Because there are songs that are meant to be heard only once. And that's all it takes. With moonlight shining off empty tracks and a low mechanical rumble that no longer belongs to this world, we now board chapter 19 of Whispers of the Ancient City. It is a tale told by trolley drivers who quit without explanation, and tourists who swear they paid for a ride they never took. This is the story of the phantom trolley car, the one that runs without rails, bound for a destination no living soul has seen. Chapter 19. Last Ride of the Evening. The Phantom Trolley of St. Augustine. By day, St. Augustine's trolleys are cheerful, bustling, and filled with the voices of laughing tourists and guides, sharing tales of history and hauntings. But after the last official tour ends, and the final trolley parks at the depot, sometimes, a seventh trolley still rolls through town. Unnumbered, unlit, unscheduled. If you see it, it won't be listed on the route board. If you hear it, the sound won't come from any known direction. And if you board it, you may not come back. A trolley without a name. The first recorded sighting came in 1969 after a conductor named Walter Walt McNeil failed to return his trolley at the end of the shift. The next morning, his car was found, parked normally at the depot. But Walt was gone. His coat lay neatly folded on the seat. The keys were still in the ignition. No signs of struggle. No tracks leaving the area. Just a faint smell of ozone and burning cedar lingering inside the cabin. The strange schedule. Since then, locals and visitors alike have reported seeing a green and white trolley rolling through side streets after 11 p.m. Long after services end, it never stops at official stations. Its windows are tinted, but passengers can be seen, sitting too still. Sometimes, one seat is empty. Always the same seat. Front row, far left. Some say that's where Walt still rides, waiting to finish his shift. But others claim it's reserved for whoever's next. The girl with no ticket. In 1997, a woman named Sharon Doyle, visiting from Maine, claimed she boarded the late-night trolley outside her inn. She was surprised at how quiet it was, but the conductor didn't speak. Just nodded and motioned for her to sit. The ride was smooth. Too smooth. No bumps, no brakes. The city outside looked different, older, darker. As they neared the city gates, Sharon looked around and realized that none of the other riders were blinking or breathing. Panicked, she tried to speak, but her voice made no sound. The conductor turned around, face pale, eyes hollow, and said, "No one rides free." She woke up in her hotel room the next morning, fully dressed, shoes muddy. The concierge claimed no trolleys run that late. The ticket in her coat pocket had no date, no price, no ink. Just a single stamped word, paid. The sound that follows. Several night workers near King Street and San Marco have heard a bell ring in the early morning hours. Just one chime, like a last call. Sometimes, the smell of old grease and smoke follows, along with a flicker of headlights in the fog. But the trolley never arrives. And those who walk alone afterward often feel like they're being followed by wheels, grinding slowly on asphalt. One park ranger claims he even saw tracks forming behind him, despite standing on a brick road. They disappeared moments later. A warning from another conductor. In 2014, a retired trolley operator named Jesse Ford left a message in a local ghost tour office's guest book. It read, "If you see the one with no route number, keep walking. If the doors open for you, don't get on. And if you hear the bell, but see no trolley, someone else just did." He died 3 days later. Heart failure. His last known photo. He's standing on St. George Street. Behind him, barely visible in the distance, a green and white trolley parked at no stop. Final stop. They say the phantom trolley appears only to those who are too tired to keep walking, too lost to find their way, or too curious for their own good. If you ever see it, do not make eye contact with the conductor. Do not speak to the other passengers. And no matter how inviting it looks, don't sit in the empty seat. Because once you're on board, you never remember getting off. And now, we arrive at the chilling chapter 20 of Whispers of the Ancient City. The final entry in this haunting journey. For now. This tale takes us beyond gravestones and into the very trees themselves. Ancient oaks, older than memory, older than St. Augustine itself. Twisting, groaning, and leaning as if whispering among themselves. This is the story of the Hollow of the Dead Oaks. And the path you should never take. Chapter 20. The Trees That Remember. The Hollow of the Dead Oaks. There is a trail just beyond Hospital Creek, near the edge of the marshlands, where the woods grow unusually quiet. Tourists don't find it. Locals pretend it isn't there. No sign marks the way, no map includes it. But if you stray just far enough from the beaten paths of St. Augustine's mission grounds, you might notice a break in the brush. And a tunnel of oaks leaning into each other overhead. The trees are twisted in ways that feel wrong. Their limbs curl inward, forming an arch. Their bark is blackened, not by fire, but by age and sorrow. They call it the Hollow of the Dead Oaks. And some say it's where the earth remembers the unmarked dead. A place of forgotten graves. According to oral tradition, before St. Augustine's founding, the land was used by the Timucua people for sky burials, leaving their dead in sacred trees to return to the wind and stars. Later, when the Spanish arrived, the land was taken and repurposed, but the bones remained. And when the British came, they buried their war dead there. Quietly, without ceremony, without names. Disease victims, traitors, prisoners of war, they were left beneath the roots. And the trees. They grew crooked, not toward the sun, but toward each other. The vanishing. In 1933, a folklorist named Harold Lanning came to St. Augustine to collect ghost stories. He set up camp near Hospital Creek and began to interview locals. They warned him not to follow the hollow trail, especially at night. Harold didn't listen. His last journal entry reads, "The trees here feel alive. Not like plants, but like people holding their breath. I swear I saw something move with me, branch to branch." He disappeared the next morning. All that was found was his journal and a single tree near the end of the hollow, with a strange new knot in its bark. A human face, mouth open in mid-scream. The fog that doesn't lift. Hikers who have accidentally wandered into the hollow often report a sudden, unnatural silence, as if the birds refused to sing. A low groaning from the trees themselves. Feeling watched, not from behind, but above. One man claimed he saw shadows moving from branch to branch, too large to be animals. Another turned around to retrace his steps, only to find that the path had changed. The entrance was gone. It took him 3 hours to find his way out. When he got back to his car, his watch was 23 minutes fast. He'd gained time. or lost something else. The trees know your name. The most unsettling stories come from those who claim to hear their names whispered. Faintly, almost lovingly. From the branches. Sometimes in their own voice. Sometimes in a voice they haven't heard since childhood. Sometimes in a voice they thought was dead. And if you respond, the trees move closer. One woman, a former park ranger, swore she saw the roots of an oak pulling themselves across the dirt toward a lost hiker. She screamed, and the trees froze. The man escaped. She quit the next day. A final prayer. Near the center of the hollow lies a clearing no bigger than a kitchen, ringed with 7 oaks. In the middle sits a pile of stones. No plaque, no carvings, just a crude cairn. No one placed it there. It was grown. If you stand inside that ring, the air turns still. Even the insects stop. Some say the clearing is a burial ground. Others say it's a mouth. And if you stay too long, the hollow won't let you leave. Before you step in, if you find the hollow, do not speak your name aloud. Do not follow the breeze. It is not the wind. If the trail bends twice but the shadows don't shift, turn back immediately. And if you hear the oaks creak in rhythm, don't breathe. Because once they know your name, they remember it forever. Epilogue. The City That Remembers. 20 chapters. 20 doors left slightly open. But St. Augustine has more stories than stones. More ghosts than graves. More watchers than candles in windows. And as long as the streets remain lit by lantern light and the fog rolls in from the bay, the city will keep whispering. You just have to be quiet enough to listen.